Whether he's butting heads with his own bandmates or mouthing off in the press, legendary Van Halen frontman David Lee Roth has never been one to shy away from confrontation.
You wanna test me?
Roth would even engage in a public feud with Wolfgang Van Halen, the son of his deceased bandmate Eddie Van Halen. The two had already been on each other's bad side for years. After his father's passing, Wolfgang insinuated that Roth was to blame for the lack of a tribute show honoring his memory. He would tell Rolling Stone, "There are some people that make it very difficult to do anything when it comes to Van Halen. After being in Van Halen for a long time, I really have strived to have an environment where there is no walking on eggshells and there is no personality that you have to deal with. It's just guys having fun making music and just having a good time. But you know, from my time in Van Halen, there was always some stuff that gets in the way from just making music and having a good time. And I think that's what happened." When pressed by the magazine on whether he was specifically referring to Roth, Wolfgang replied, "I would say, do your own research on the history of Van Halen and come to your conclusions." In the months that followed, Wolfgang persistently made veiled insults towards Roth in interviews, placing the blame on the singer for the ongoing drama surrounding his father's band.
With Van Halen, there's many pieces that don't operate as they should, unfortunately. But you know, that's neither here nor there. That's just how reality is, unfortunately, sometimes.
Unsurprisingly, Roth didn't take this lying down, firing back in a lengthy verbal tirade on an episode of his Roth Show podcast. The singer would repeatedly call Wolfgang this kid, as well as a schlemiel, which means fool in Yiddish. He blasted the younger Van Halen for benefiting from nepotism, and further mocked Wolfgang for allegedly complaining to the band's business managers that he wasn't getting enough attention on stage. Roth went on to recall a story wherein a spiteful Wolfgang demanded the removal of one of Van Halen's accountants from a backstage area after mistaking her for Roth's girlfriend.
Wolfie Van Halen's gonna teach me a lesson by throwing out what he thinks is my girlfriend. But guess what? Not only is this an accountant again, and not only is she carrying the paychecks for 82 of us on the road crew, but she's carrying cash bonuses for everybody there. This kid. This kid.
That same month, Roth would fire shots at Sammy Hagar, the singer who had replaced him in Van Halen back in 1985, uploading a nearly 30-minute rant to his YouTube channel filled with a number of bizarre allegations.
And I think we've arrived at both the technical and the medical answer that may explain some of Sammy Hagar's conduct and his constant spew of diarrhea vitriol in our direction. Sammy Hagar was abducted by aliens, and he was probed, Tom.
The two former Van Halen vocalists have been embroiled in an on-again, off-again feud for nearly 40 years, with fans often adding fuel to the fire by pledging allegiance to one of the singers. In essence, most Van Halen enthusiasts are either loyal to Roth or Hagar, but rarely both. As a result, the two often trade vicious jabs with one another in the press.
I'm assuming you're not doing any Hagar stuff. You would never do that, would you?
Well, there's a credibility issue there. Good, bad, or in the middle, you know Roth means it. The other guy doesn't. And that's why it sold half as well. Literally, Midas, Bible, half. Never did better than half. And why would you bring that into the proceedings? This hamburger don't need no helper. Ain't no rehearsing pants in my closet.
During a November 2023 appearance on The Howard Stern Show, Hagar rekindled their ongoing rivalry when he invited Roth to join him on stage for an upcoming tour. However, things were not as they seemed.
If David Lee Roth wants to come out and join us, come on.
Despite seemingly extending an olive branch to Roth, some fans speculated that Hagar's invitation was a calculated PR move rather than a sincere gesture. The skepticism only grew when VanHalenNewsDesk.com reported that neither Hagar nor any of his business associates ever got in touch with Roth in regards to joining the tour. Seemingly calling Hagar's bluff, Roth would take him up on his offer, releasing an official statement which read, "I'm ready to go. Let's do do this. Hagar would immediately backtrack, revoking his invitation to Roth and subsequently blasting him on social media. Hagar wrote, "I know better than to have him on tour again. Been there, done that." Hagar, of course, was referring to the pair's disastrous 2002 co-headlining tour, a venture aimed at reconciling the two bitter enemies for the sake of Van Halen fans. But rather than healing old wounds, touring together only exacerbated their strained relationship. After the two singers nearly got into a fistfight backstage, management would even resort to constructing a barricade to keep Roth and Hagar apart. In the middle of the tour, the duo would present the award for Best Rock Video at the 2002 MTV Video Music Awards, where the tension between Roth and Hagar was readily apparent.
Dave, relax. All these people aren't here to see you. You know what I'm saying?
Look at all the people here tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
In the wake of their uncomfortable appearance at the VMAs, the remaining dates of the tour were cancelled. Hagar looks back on his co-headliner with Roth unfavorably, particularly when it came to Roth's singing.
He just always is about, how can I, make this guy look bad? Or not just me, in life. I mean, how can I make myself, he's a chest beating man. And, God bless him, because like I said, that early stuff was freaking great. I personally, I've tried to say, he'd be a fun guy to know, but he ain't like that. He ain't like his persona. Right. When you get around him, he ain't that guy, man. He's some other cat. He doesn't care about singing. If he did, he'd take care of his voice, or he'd take voice lessons, he'd warm up, he'd do something, because the guy sings so bad last time he was doing shows. It was embarrassing to me when people say, "Oh, you were in Van Halen." I'm going, no. I was starting to deny it, just in case they thought I was him. So
now I see what you mean.
Yeah, but he's a showman. He just, everything show. And he doesn't care about his voice, which drives me nuts, man.
But Hagar wasn't the only one who felt as if Roth's voice had aged poorly, as Diamond Dave's declining vocal abilities would even get him kicked off of Kiss's final world tour. When questioned about Roth's unceremonious dismissal, Kiss co-founder Gene Simmons would state, "During Dave's heyday, nobody did what he did. He was the ultimate frontman. And then, I don't know what happened to him. Something. And you get modern day Dave. I prefer to remember Elvis Presley in his prime. I don't want to think of bloated naked Elvis on the bathroom floor." Further adding insult to injury, the vacant opening slot was filled by performance painter Garibaldi, insinuating that fans were better off literally watching paint dry rather than witnessing a David Lee Roth show. Roth would eventually respond to the insults, taking to his Instagram page with 18 back-to-back posts of an image of a boy with his middle finger up. The post was captioned, "Roth to Simmons." This was enough to prompt a rare apology from the famously unapologetic Simmons, who would publicly ask Roth for his forgiveness.
"I am so sorry and ashamed, actually, that I hurt David's feelings. You hear me talking. I just sort of stream of consciousness. I don't mean to hurt people's feelings. And every once in a while, diarrhea of the mouth comes out."
And while Simmons would express regret over bad-mouthing Roth, this next rock legend would not, as the Prince of Darkness himself, Ozzy Osbourne, would paint Roth in an unfavorable light during a 2022 interview with Revolver magazine. When looking back on Black Sabbath's 1978 tour alongside a young Van Halen, Osbourne would state, "Eddie Van Halen was such a great guy, but David Lee Roth, he's lost a couple of nuts and bolts. When you meet him, it's like, what's wrong with him? He's like somewhere else, you know?" However, Osbourne was not the first to cast a stone. In fact, Roth had previously criticized Osbourne during a 1988 interview with Steve Harris, stating that he wasn't a fan of Ozzy's solo career.
Ozzy is product. It's a simple distillation of heavy metal in its simplest form, again and again and again. And I don't like it, because I really like heavy metal or hard rock as a type of music. It's the bands that play it currently that I don't buy. Ozzy's one of them.
In that same interview, Roth would also disparage Guns N' Roses frontman Axl Rose, deriding him as a Robert Plant copycat and dismissing his writing style as overly simplistic. The two would later cross paths in August of 1988 at England's Monsters of Rock Festival, where GNR opened for Roth's solo band. Tragically, the crowd became violent during Guns N' Roses' set, resulting in the death of 2 young fans, with a third being seriously injured. Axl was greatly distressed by the incident, and feeling that he needed wisdom from a veteran rock star, turned to Roth for advice on how to deal with his grief. But Roth would fail to provide Rose with any comfort. As GNR manager Doug Goldstein recalls, "So Axl said, 'How do you deal with stuff like that when it happens?' He goes, 'Oh, man, you're in the UK. 10 people die every time they hold a soccer match. F it, it's rock and roll.' Axl just said, 'Really? I'm sorry, I really don't want to sit here anymore.' He went back to his room. He was disgusted at Dave, and I was kind of embarrassed that I introduced them. Nevertheless, no other rivalry can match the resentment and bitterness that existed between David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen. Their deep-seated animosity cast a looming shadow over the Van Halen band, constantly putting the group's very existence in jeopardy."
For Edward and I, there is a lot of whatever that chemical is in guys. We both are competitive to an obsessive, whatever you call it, obsessive compulsive nature.
From the very moment they met, Roth and Eddie didn't exactly get along. The singer would audition for Van Halen on multiple occasions, facing rejection each and every time. However, the band would continue renting Roth's fancy PA system for $50 a night, eventually deciding to give in and let Roth into the band after Eddie grew tired of singing himself. With Van Halen's lineup now officially complete, it quickly became apparent that Eddie and Roth had conflicting approaches to songwriting, which caused quite a bit of tension between them. Eddie wanted to create dark and complex songs that pushed the boundaries of music, while Roth envisioned Van Halen as the next Aerosmith and focused on writing songs about partying. But as it turned out, Roth's pop-leaning approach worked in perfect harmony with Eddie's musical genius, and the band's 1978 debut quickly rose to the top of the charts, with their subsequent releases continuing to cement their dominance as the feel-good party band of the decade. But as the years went on, Eddie and Roth's artistic differences worsened to the point where the band was in a constant state of inner turmoil. By the early 80s, Eddie was interested in exploring new experimental sounds, but he began to feel like Roth had taken over too much of the band's creative direction and was holding him back. That's when the guitarist decided to seize control over the production of Van Halen's 4th studio album, 1981's Fair Warning, going as far as sneaking into the studio behind his band's back to work on the album all by himself. Unfortunately for Eddie, this resulted in Van Halen's worst-selling album of that decade. To make an already turbulent time even worse, Roth then began feuding with Eddie's soon-to-be wife, actress Valerie Bertinelli. The couple had met at a Van Halen concert the previous year, and would tie the knot a mere 8 months later, with their whirlwind romance becoming the subject of non-stop tabloid coverage. Roth became increasingly frustrated with the media's fixation on Eddie rather than himself. He would subsequently ban all wives and girlfriends from the backstage area in protest, a move that was clearly meant to single out Bertinelli. Their infighting, however, was briefly interrupted by the band's label, who began pushing them back into the studio to record a new album. The resulting LP, titled Diver Down, was infamous as the album that Eddie Van Halen loathed creating the most, primarily due to its heavy reliance on cover songs, which were insisted upon by Roth. Yet despite Eddie's contempt, Diver Down went on to become a smashing success. In the months that followed, Roth's ego began spiraling out of control, and his relationship with Eddie continued to disintegrate. Seemingly in rebellion against his creative differences with Roth, Eddie would resort to building his own recording studio at home, which he dubbed 5150. The guitarist was now free to bring his vision of Van Halen to life. in total isolation and without any outside interference. Roth was predictably disappointed by his banishment from the studio, and became utterly panicked when he finally heard Eddie's new creations. The guitarist had developed a newfound obsession with synthesizers, and wrote songs filled with shimmering electronic hooks, a move which Roth believed would be rejected by their fan base. But the exact opposite was true, as Van Halen's sixth studio album, titled 1984, would prove to be their most successful release yet, spearheaded by the blockbuster success of lead single Jump. However, despite soaring to heights of popularity they never dreamed were possible, Eddie and Roth were on the verge of reaching their breaking point behind the scenes. In 1985, CBS Studios reportedly paid Roth $10 million to write, direct, and star in a major motion picture. Roth would subsequently ask Eddie to create the film's soundtrack, a request the guitarist declined. This proved to be the final straw in their relationship. According to Eddie himself, Roth was enraged by the rejection and quit the band on the spot. It would take over 2 decades and a number of failed attempts for Roth and Eddie Van Halen to work together again, with the two joyously announcing their reunion at a 2007 press conference.
Here, this is Alex. I'd like to start off with this.
New brother.
Following Eddie's untimely death on October 6, 2020, Roth would pay a heartfelt tribute to his occasional nemesis and greatest collaborator.
I gotta tell you, playing with Ed, writing songs with Ed, presenting those songs with Ed was better than any love affair I ever had. And some of those songs I think might last forever, or until the last syllable of time, like Shakespeare said. They became anthems. Where are they playing Jump right now?